Norse berserkers would bite their shields and foam at the mouth while consuming psychoactive mushrooms that made them feel no pain and fight with superhuman strength. This isn't just some myth from an old book. This was real. Imagine facing an army of warriors who are literally out of their minds, howling like animals, completely immune to pain, charging straight at you. It's the stuff of nightmares. Today, we're going to uncover the 5 most insane truths history class left out. So, let's get right into the craziest part first. The drugs. We've all heard stories of warriors getting hyped up for battle, but the berserkers took it to a level that is almost impossible to believe. The sagas, these ancient Norse stories, are filled with descriptions of them consuming specific types of mushrooms. Most likely the Amanita muscaria, a powerful psychoactive fungus. Imagine popping one of these right before you charge into 100 enemy soldiers. The world around you would warp and twist, and the fear you once felt would be replaced by an uncontrollable, burning rage. The chemicals in these mushrooms would fundamentally alter their brain chemistry, shutting down the parts responsible for fear and pain. We have accounts describing berserkers continuing to fight with wounds that would have instantly dropped any normal man. An arrow through the chest, a sword slash across the gut. It didn't matter. They simply would not stop. They were walking, screaming engines of destruction, fueled by a potent cocktail of natural psychedelics and pure adrenaline. The shield biting wasn't just for show either. The hallucinogens would cause intense muscle tension and jaw clenching, leading them to literally chew on the edges of their wooden shields. This act became a terrifying symbol of their impending explosion of violence. When an enemy army saw a line of warriors gnawing on their shields, they knew the absolute worst was about to be unleashed upon them. And the foaming at the mouth? That was another very real, very terrifying side effect. They were pushing the human machine past every conceivable limit, and the physical signs were as horrifying as the violence they were about to commit. Think about the psychological impact of this. You're a farmer who was just handed a spear to defend your village. You wouldn't think they were human. You'd think demons had risen from the underworld to drag you to hell. Your morale would be shattered before the first sword was even swung. Now, if the drug-fueled rage wasn't enough, imagine them doing it naked. Or, even weirder, wearing nothing but the skin of a giant bear. The word berserker itself is believed to come from Old Norse berserker, which literally means bear shirt, bear skin. These warriors believed that by wearing the pelt of a powerful predator like a bear or a wolf, they could absorb its spirit and its strength. They weren't just wearing a costume, they were performing a ritual to become the animal itself. This practice tied directly into their belief in animal spirit possession. They thought they could literally shed their human form and become a bear on the battlefield. Impossibly strong, ferociously aggressive, and thick-skinned enough to shrug off blows. They wore nothing at all. They would cast off their armor and clothes, fighting with bare chests against armored opponents. The Roman historian Tacitus described similar Germanic warriors who fought naked. This tradition clearly continued with the Norsemen. Picture this. You're a fully armored soldier, sweating in your chainmail, holding a heavy shield, and charging at you is a giant, screaming man, completely naked, covered in blood and paint. It's so outside the rules of normal combat that it induces panic. It said, "Your weapons mean nothing to me. Your armor is a sign of your fear." A thick, heavy bear hide could actually offer a surprising amount of protection. Not as good as chainmail, but far better than nothing. Let's be clear, this wasn't the entire Viking army. Berserkers were an elite special forces unit, shock troops reserved for decisive moments. So you have a warrior, possibly high on mushrooms, who believes he is a bear, wearing the skin of a bear or nothing at all, screaming and foaming at the mouth, and who genuinely believes he cannot be killed. This is the person you have to fight. It's no wonder the legends have survived for 1,000 years. Entering the Berserkergang was like flipping a switch, but it was a switch they couldn't turn off. Once the rage took hold, They lost all control, all sense of reason and strategic thinking. They became a pure, indiscriminate force of destruction. This wasn't just a problem for their enemies. It was a massive danger to their own allies. Sagas tell us they would howl, make animal noises, and lose all sense of friend or foe. In one account, they attacked rocks and trees, trying to fight the landscape itself because there were no enemies nearby. Imagine being a regular Viking warrior, standing in the shield wall next to one of these guys. You're trying to hold the line, but the man next to you suddenly starts screaming, his eyes roll back, and he swings his axe at your head. The friendly fire incidents must have been horrifyingly common. The physical feats they performed in this state are legendary. Bend swords, break chains, walk through fire. When your brain isn't sending that hurt-stir signals, you can push your muscles and bones to their absolute breaking point and beyond. The trance would come in waves, fits of shivering and chattering teeth, then swelling faces, then the explosion of rage, and then finally, the howling, the animalistic behavior, the indiscriminate violence. After the battle, survivors would fall into a state of total exhaustion, sometimes sleeping for days, weak and confused with no memory of what they'd done. Later, as Viking society became more organized and Christianized, laws were passed specifically outlawing berserkers, making it a crime punishable by exile. They weren't just soldiers. They were a self-destructing human bomb aimed at the enemy and hoped not to be caught in the blast radius. The Norse had a complex relationship with them, revered and feared in equal measure. As if everything else wasn't terrifying enough, we now have archaeological evidence that berserkers physically modified their bodies to be more frightening. This isn't just speculation from old stories. This is hard science. Archaeologists digging in Viking-age graves have found skulls with something truly bizarre. Their teeth had been intentionally and painstakingly filed into sharp points. The grooves were sometimes etched with deep horizontal notches and even filled with pigment to stand out. A warrior screams in your face, and you see that his teeth have been filed down into fangs, like a wolf. This was 100% for psychological intimidation. They would cover their bodies in a paste of blood and ash, creating a horrifying spectacle of gray and dark red. The ash would give them a deathly, ghostly pallor, while the blood, animal or even their own, was a stark symbol of the violence to come. A berserker was a berserker 24/7. When he smiled at you in the village market, you saw the fangs. The time and pain it must have taken to file down a full set of teeth with primitive tools is just unbelievable. Filing teeth without anesthetic? It's torture. But for them, this pain was likely part of the ritual, a test of endurance and commitment to the warrior cult. They were cultivating an image. Teeth, paint, pelts, weapons, used to build a reputation that did half the fighting for them. They were masters of branding, and their brand was pure, unholy terror. When you pull a skull out of the ground that perfectly matches the description of a terrifying warrior from a 1,000-year-old text, you have to start taking those texts a lot more seriously. By enduring this pain, they separated themselves from ordinary people, becoming something more than human long before the battlefield. So we have the drugs, the animal pelts, the trance, and the terrifying body modifications. How did they actually use all of this in a real battle? The shield wall was the tank of ancient warfare, a disciplined formation of interlocking shields almost impenetrable to a frontal assault. But the Vikings had a secret weapon. They didn't use their berserkers to grind. They used them to break. At the perfect moment, when both lines were tired and locked in a stalemate, the signal would be given. A small group of berserkers, maybe just a dozen, would work themselves into the full Berserkergang right behind their own lines. Biting shields and smashing weapons built an incredible amount of tension and fear on both sides. The enemy could hear something monstrous and inhuman coming for them. Then they were unleashed. They would charge, not as a disciplined unit, but as a scattered, screaming mob, right at a single point in the enemy shield wall. Because they had no fear of death and felt no pain, they would hurl themselves with suicidal abandon into the wall of shields and spears. A berserker would impale himself on 3 spears just to get close enough to swing his axe. The goal wasn't to kill everyone. The goal was to create a breach. Their sheer ferocity and the terror they inspired would cause soldiers in that section to panic. Shields part for just a second, or men turn and run. Once that small gap was created, the rest of the Viking army, disciplined and waiting, would pour into the breach like water through a broken dam. The shield wall would collapse from the inside out, and the organized army would dissolve into chaotic melee. Exactly the kind of fight the Vikings excelled at. Think about it. A dozen men in the space of about 30 seconds could completely turn the tide of a battle involving thousands of soldiers. A king might lose all 12 berserkers in the charge, but in sacrificing them, he could win the entire battle and save hundreds of his other warriors. All the crazy things, the mushrooms, the nakedness, the filed teeth, the trance, weren't random acts of madness. They were components of a single, devastating military strategy. They were designed to culminate in one terrifying moment, a suicidal charge that could shatter the morale of an entire army and win the day. The Berserker wasn't just a crazy warrior, he was the most advanced weapon of his time. They were the nuke of the Viking Age. All of it, the rituals, the drugs, the brutal psychology, combined to create a surgical instrument of terror. A dozen could change the fate of thousands. The return on investment for a Viking king was immense. Remember, the most mind-blowing technique was psychological. Charge enemy shield walls in small groups while roaring like wild animals, creating such terror that entire armies would break and flee before a sword was ever swung. From psychoactive mushrooms to filed teeth and suicidal charges, the Berserker was more than just a warrior. They were a living weapon of terror. They pushed the limits of what a human body and mind could endure, transforming themselves into monsters to protect their people and conquer their enemies. They weren't just a footnote in Viking history. They were central to their success and fearsome reputation across Europe. As Viking society evolved, became Christianized and organized, there was no place left for these uncontrollable warriors. They were outlawed, hunted down, and faded into legend. Yet archaeologists are still uncovering evidence of their practices 1,000 years later. We still talk about them, make movies about them, and debate the line between myth and reality. They were real. So the next time you watch a movie about Vikings, remember the terrifying truth you learned today. Remember the bearskins, the mushroom rage, the sharpened teeth, and the men who fought naked because they believed they were gods of war. The reality was far more insane than any fiction. Thanks for watching.